and this is just me, I want her denaturalized and deported. Uh, she her actions as a representative for the House have been reprehensible. I want her. I want her gone.
That our Republican colleagues are not here because they were comfortable in taking money from that would be allocated for food stamps. They were comfortable in taking money that would be allocated for housing. They were taking money that would be allocated in addressing health care to try to fund what is now providing the resources for the occupation that we are experiencing here in Minnesota. $175 billion that could have been provided for so many of our vulnerable communities now being utilized to create detention cells for Americans by ICE and Border Patrol. By shooting an American citizen, a mother, in the face, not once, but twice, but 3 times. By dragging a pregnant U.S. citizen on the floor for everyone to watch. And as Representative Aaron Cagle just sent me, is staging 4 ICE trucks in front of Spring Lake High School as kids are being let out for their lunch break. Our Republican colleagues are not saying anything because they are comfortable for people to be terrorized in St. Cloud, Minnesota, where they represent, in Wilmer, Minnesota, where they represent, in Mankato, Minnesota, where they represent. And we've seen what has been happening in Rochester and in Rosemount. This is not just an occupation that is terrorizing people in Minnesota that live in Minneapolis and St. Paul, which they are comfortable with when the president says he's coming for retribution because they think it's Democrats who voted against the president that he's coming after. But it is all of Minnesota. When my constituents call for help, we don't ask them who they voted for, because that is what it means to be an elected U.S. representative. So it is appalling. It is appalling for our colleagues on the other side of the aisle to be okay for the president to carry out retribution here in Minnesota. It is appalling for our Republican colleagues to be okay for there to be cell detentions in ICE for American citizens. It is appalling for them to be okay for there to be checkpoints in American cities where people are asked for their papers. And it is appalling for Americans to have to carry their citizen papers only to be told they are not sure if those papers are correct. I don't want to curse, but those of us who escaped places like that, the one place where we thought we would never experience this is the U.S. goddamn States. And we should all be ashamed that it is the United States that is allowing for this to take place, and it is being forecasted and broadcasted to the rest of the world, where people are calling and saying, are you sure this is America?
We've been asking ourselves that for the past, 4 or 5 years. Is this America? Because our borders were completely obliterated. And people like yourself, Representative Omar, were brought here out of the kindness of our hearts. And it's only been taken advantage of. So when you sit there with your hubris and act like, oh, I can't believe this is happening to us. It's happening to you because you've disrespected the country. Nobody's fighting for illegal immigration, ma'am. Never. Nobody's backing that. But apparently you are. And I am so glad that you've said everything that you've said, because now we know what you stand for. You don't stand for America and American values and borders and it being safe for Americans. You stand for the exact opposite. I will be very grateful when you are denaturalized, removed from Congress, and deported. It needs to happen now. The American people are tired of being, we're tired of looking bad. You're not adding to America. You are taking away. You are. By your statements, I don't want to cuss, but yeah. And you didn't have to. You didn't have to. But again, we know who you support. You support illegal activity. You support wide open borders. You definitely support fraud. You're okay with all of it because you haven't talked against the fraud. You haven't said that we need to have safer borders. Yeah, $175 billion should be removed. You know why it has to be removed? Because 175 billion of it is more than likely fraudulent. And that's the amount of money that's not going to be sent to these quote unquote programs. The American people are exhausted and tired of being taken advantage of. But those are some of the articles that I definitely wanted to share with you guys. Now, this last one we're going to get into, this one's interesting because apparently this has to do with Don Lemon. And there was like a protest that happened at a church, and apparently, allegedly, they're saying he's a part of it. Oops. I gotta add it. Let me add that one. I got a lot of clips today, you guys. So let me add that.
We're back, y'all. Thank you for watching today. Go ahead and hit that like button, my people. You know that it helps us out a ton. And of course, it helps you because it helps us keep bringing you these stories every day. Now, y'all know that ground zero for crazy in the United States right now is in the great state of Minnesota. People are going absolutely bonkers and losing their minds over the ICE activities there, over the immigration enforcement activities there. And I think that today's story is going to be probably example number one in days and weeks to come. You see, just yesterday, y'all, a group of protesters somehow got the idea that a pastor of a local church in St. Paul, there were reports that this was Minneapolis, but this was actually the twin city of Minneapolis, which is St. Paul. So they somehow got this idea, like this pastor, he might have something to do with ICE. So a group of them stormed the church and essentially took over the church while church was in session, y'all. So we're going to be taking a look at that today. And guess who was right there along with them? Now, I'm not saying he was leading this. What will we call this disruption? Let's just call it something simple. I'm not saying he was leading the disruption, but yo, boy, y'all remember Don Lemon, who used to be on CNN, who was unceremoniously let go from that fine news organization? Well, Don Lemon was up in there, y'all, and people are actually saying he might be in some legal trouble for this. I'm going to let this play out. Y'all will see exactly what happened. So without further ado, y'all, let's go ahead and get into it. But before we do, y'all, you know that we are Paralegal School. YouTube subscribers, click the
Minneapolis, and this particular incident is now triggering a federal investigation. A group of protesters stormed and disrupted a Sunday church service because of one of the pastor's possible connections to ICE. The U.S. Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights announced there would be a federal probe over this, writing this on X. The Civil Rights Division is investigating the potential violations of the Federal FACE Act by these people, desecrating a house of worship and interfering with Christian worshipers.
Now, as I said, Mr. Lemon was in the mix, and listen, he's going to be interviewing, I think this is the pastor of the church. And to me, it seems like Mr. Lemon is being sympathetic to the protesters and defending their First Amendment rights to come into your church and disrupt your service, y'all. I don't think the First Amendment applies to protesters going onto private property, y'all. But Mr. Limon, the famous CNN news person, he'll be the one to let you know about that.
This is unacceptable. It's shameful. It's shameful to interrupt a public gathering of Christians in worship.
But there were folks who will say,
I have to take care of my flock.
Okay, but listen, we live in there's a constitution in the First Amendment to freedom of speech and freedom to assemble and protest.
We're here to worship. We're here to worship Jesus because that's the hope of these cities. That's the hope of the world is Jesus Christ.
I want to be very respectful. Please don't push me, though.
We're here to worship Jesus. Yes. That's why we're here. Yes. Okay, that's why we're here. Okay. That's what we're about.
Don't you think Jesus would be understanding
we're about
and love these folks?
We're about spreading the love of Jesus.
But did you try to talk to them as a Christian?
No one is willing to talk.
Okay.
I have to take care of my church and my family, so I ask that you actually would also leave this building.
You don't want us to chronicle what happened?
Unless you're here to worship.
I'm always worship. I'm a Christian.
We're here to worship. Yeah. We're here to worship. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Stop that. Stop it. He is married to a man. He is not a Christian. Stop that.
And just to get a little bit of reaction to this, y'all, we have Mr. Paul Chappell. He is going to give his retort, his condemnation, y'all, if we want to be honest. He's going to give his condemnation to this activity. He did say that this happened in Minneapolis. Again, I think he was just mistaken about that. This happened in St. Paul, which is right over there by Minneapolis, frankly. So let's listen to Mr. Chappell. I don't think it's Chappelle, but it might be. Let's listen to what he had to say here.
Today in Minneapolis, Minnesota, a group of activists led by Don Lemon stormed a Baptist church by the name of Cities Church during their worship time. They were screaming and chanting, disrupting the singing and the preaching because they suspected an ICE officer may attend the church. This is a violation of what is known as the FACE Act. And not only do we condemn this act, but tonight I want to demand that the Department of Justice investigate what took place in Minneapolis, apprehend those who broke the law, and arrest them accordingly. We must protect religious liberty in this country. As people meet to worship God, they have been given legally the right to enter, to worship, and to leave their place of worship. The Lord Jesus said, "In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer, I have overcome the world." I have preached for many years that there will come a time when we'll find out who are Christians by label and by convenience, and who are Christians by conviction. And certainly we're entering those days now. I believe we should pray for this congregation, and we should be vigilant as Christians to exercise our freedom, to worship our Savior, and to stand unashamed for the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I might add as a subnote that we welcome all branches of law enforcement to Lancaster Baptist Church. And so let us pause before we begin tonight and have a word of prayer and ask the Lord to bless and to meet the needs in this situation.
So yeah, y'all, do y'all remember during the Iraq War? Do you remember the Iraq War in the early 2000s? What happened? We went into Iraq, and Iraq became the place where people who wanted to fight the United States from all over the world, they all went to Iraq to fight the United States. It was just a convenient location. We had troops there. We had a large presence there, and it was acceptable to fight us in the sense of that's what was happening, right? So there were groups of people, there was money, there was organization, there was coordination. I think that's what's happening in Minnesota, y'all. I think Minnesota is becoming ground zero for the not so mentally stable people. I wouldn't be surprised if we find out at some point that the mentally unstable people actually went to Minnesota in order to fight ICE. You know, I'm doing the air quotes here. I wouldn't be surprised if that is what we find out at some point. Like, okay, so if this continues on, it's going to wake up, you know, the people who who are out there who are just seething at the fact that people who are in the country without permission might have to leave. They're gonna wake up that thing inside of them that's not so mentally stable, and I think it's starting to wake up, and it's like, oh, I got to get over there. I got to do something. So if the Minnesota authorities want to have any kind of semblance of normality, they're going to have to bring this temperature down and do something to stop these crazy protests.
Yeah, because that's crazy. Like, why are you going into a church? Like, what is wrong with you? Like, it's some things are just too far. And that's why we have laws. Just saying. So here's a timeline of that incident. So on January 18th, dozens of anti-ICE protesters enter City's church in St. Paul, Minnesota during a morning worship. So this was this past Sunday. They chant ICE out and disrupted proceedings, accusing Pastor David Easterwood of being a top local ICE official. The service is halted with protesters shouting at worshipers and labeling the church as white supremacist. Former CNN anchor Don Lemon, now an independent journalist, is on site reporting live. He films the demonstration, interviews activists, Nikema Levy Armstrong inside the church, and speaks with a pastor who asks him to leave unless he is there to worship. Lemon tells the pastor that protest is protected speech. It remains unclear if Easterwood was present, though some reports claim he was. Now, the Assistant Attorney General, Hermet DeLeon, head of the DOJ Civil Rights Division, announces a federal investigation into the protesters for desecrating a house of worship and interfering with Christian worshipers. Post on X, Don Lemon is on notice, accusing him of pseudo journalism by disrupting the prayer service and warning that a house of worship is not a public forum protected by the First Amendment, right? The DOJ confirms involvement from the U.S. Attorney's Office, FBI, and Department of Homeland Security. And what that probably it's not a public forum protected by the First Amendment. So, in essence, what happened, you cannot protest inside the church. Now, you can be outside the church, like on the sidewalk or whatever. You can be on the outside, but you cannot come inside and become disruptive. And what I find fascinating about this, DOJ, if you don't shut this down quickly and send a signal, this is going to happen all over the country. This is a signal that these people are ready to be combative, that they are ready to go inside of people's churches and disrupt them. Now, you're probably not going to try that down here in Georgia. Probably not. Look, because even the people that are like, you know, not like super Christians with the cape on, look, this is a two-way state. I wouldn't try it. Don't come down here with your nonsense. Don't do it. I would say don't do it anywhere. What are you thinking? It's very crazy. Now, Delon vows to pursue charges against some protesters and reiterates criticism of Lemon's role. The DOJ expands its probe into potential obstruction of law enforcement by Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Mayor Jacob Frey, possibly under the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances, which is the FACE Act, right? Don Lemon responds to the DOJ's notice in statements to media outlets, calling it telling that he is being framed as the face of the protest despite other reporters being present. In a separate podcast interview, Lemon doubles down by criticizing the churchgoers as entitled due to white supremacy and defending the protesters' actions. This is why you're the poster child for this, because you put yourself at the forefront. You're weird. You do things and then cry victim when people call you out on your mess. You're messy. I'm just going to say that, Don Lemon, you're messy. You're messy. It's bad. So, does Don Lemon share any responsibility? That's what I'm trying to figure out. So, views on Don Lemon's responsibility differ sharply along partisan lines, reflecting media bias in coverage. No charges have been filed against him as of January 20th, but the DOJ's investigation includes scrutiny of his actions, right? So, there's arguments suggesting responsibility, arguments against responsibility. So ultimately, whether Lemon shares responsibility hinges on interpretations of his intent and actions, journalistic coverage versus active participation. So the thing is, they were trying to tie him to the protesters that were there. Now, if the protesters were there, but he was in the capacity of just being a journalist to ask questions, okay, but you're interrupting the church service with the protesters. You didn't wait till all of that died down and then said, hey, Pastor, can I talk to you about the events that occurred? You didn't do that. You were actively involved while the protesters were doing their thing. So it's going to be interesting. They'll find emails, I'm sure. So legal experts in the report suggest any charges would depend on evidence of direct interference, but the incident has fueled debates over press freedoms in private spaces like churches. They're not allowed there. Now, if they wanted to record something, they could ask, but if they were told no, because our parishioners do not want to be recorded, they can't record. They can't. Now, I know that there have been times where people, secretly record things on their phone and release things and different things like that. It happens. It does happen. But I'm talking about like CNN can't just like pop up in the corner in a church and be like, hey, we want to do this. It's like, no. Our parishioners might not feel that comfortable. Just saying. So we're going to see, where this rabbit hole leads. And I also pulled up the article on, all sides. So ICE demonstrators chase and allegedly assault a right-wing activist in Minnesota. Oh, that's a totally different thing. Sorry. That happened too. Yeah, this is Tell It All Tuesday. So that happened too. This is outside of what happened with Don Lemon, but apparently anti-ICE demonstrators chased and allegedly assaulted a right-wing activist in Minnesota. So for context, on Saturday, Land wore a vest with patches that read infidel and 47, a reference to Trump. He also used a microphone to shout, send the Somalis back and go home Muslims. No official reports of Lang's reported injury or assault have been filed with Minnesota Police Department. Lang had organized the march to protest the alleged fraud in the state's social service system. Those charged have largely been of Somali descent. Lang had been pardoned from his criminal activities on January 6th by President Trump after spending several years in jail. Tensions remain high in Minnesota as Trump stated he might invoke the Insurrection Act to quell demonstrations. Wow. This is how the media covered it. Reuters Center called the alleged attackers anti-ICE demonstrators, while Fox News on the right called them agitators. The Post-Millennial on the right showed a image of Lang with blood running down his head. The Independent that leans left wrote it in its headline that Lang described as a pardoned J6 rioter was chased from the protest. Now, CNN that's left also wrote that Lang was chased away rather than assaulted in its headline, and noted that no police reports have been filed. Yeah, it's probably not going to happen because you are in a place where they believe in anarchy. That's just who they are. So I also wanted to bring this up that there was an immigrant that died in ICE custody. So apparently Victor Manuel Diaz, 36, was a Nicaraguan citizen who came to the U.S. illegally by way of Mexico in March 2024. January 14th, he was found unconscious in his cell at 3:35 p.m. and declared dead at 4:09 p.m. after medical services attempted life-saving measures. ICE said that he died of a presumed suicide, although his official cause of death is still under investigation. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz on X calling for an investigation into his death. Diaz is the second person to die in this facility since the start of 2026. Geraldo Lunes Campos, a 55-year-old immigrant from Cuba, died while experiencing medical distress on January 3rd, according to The Guardian on the left. His death is being investigated as a potential homicide, as the medical examiner determined his cause of death was related to neck and chest compression, and a fellow detainee alleged that he saw guards choking Campos. Now, this is separate than this situation. So the Guardian highlighted in the headline that Diaz was the second person to die in this facility in 2 weeks. CBS News on the left noted that as of Thursday, the day after Diaz's death, ICE had about 73,000 people in detention, which is the highest level ever recorded by the agency. Washington Times on the right reported that both Diaz and Campos' deaths are at the facility, and Breitbart Wright noted calls for investigation from various Minnesota officials reported on Diaz's death, as well as another detainee who died in a Georgia ICE facility in early January, noting that the American Civil Liberties Union also has recently criticized the Texas facility for inhumane conditions. Guess what? Get off the soil. You don't need to be here. Like, I don't even like the fact that we have to have that our tax dollars are paying for these detention centers. I want to. You have deportation orders that day, get them out of here. But they have to hold them in a facility so they have so many of them and then fly them out. Get off the soil. You don't belong here. You don't belong here. And people that are fighting for people to break the law and stay here, it's disgusting. It is really gross. And I just, we just went over that whole church disruption in Minneapolis. And it's becoming a disgrace, really, for us to be citizens in a country that is free, where we really want to care for people who are disadvantaged, give them a way to make it. That's what the country is about. But you cannot do it